Hey everyone, welcome to the Alder Hour. No, wait, actually, Matt's out today, so it's the Rhona Hour this week. Your new favorite way to end the day. This show is part of Purple Acorn, and we're out here feeding squirrels all day, every day. Head over to purpleacorn.com after the show if you want to learn more. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn. We're trying to get to 2,000 followers by the end of March. This episode is also going to be available as a podcast wherever you get your audio. So let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. And while we do that, let's bring on my co host for today. Hey, Jocelyn. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Rhona.
Jocelyn, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I'm excited to chat today about it's quite interesting. It's called exit envy, which might be a new concept for some people, but it's what happens when you are leaving a really toxic workplace and everybody's jealous that you're leaving.
Cool stuff. Brandon, for those unfamiliar with you, can you give us a quick intro?
What is up? My name is Brandon, aka Brando, host of the Rebel TA podcast, friend of everybody over at Purple Acorn. I'm also director of talent at TLDR, which is the largest tech newsletter in the world. Closing recs and writing checks.
So cool to have you here today. What do you have for us today later in the show?
I am pretty psyched. We are going to do trending or ending together, which I am on the edge of my seat.
Cool. Amazing. All right, so let's move on to points and pints. So I'm still on my mocktail tasting journey. So today I'm having the Free AF Aperol Spritz. Jocelyn, what are you having today?
Well, after you peer pressured me, Rhona, I went ahead and got a beer. I didn't realize you're drinking a mocktail. I'm drinking an actual beer. And I realized after I pulled it, it has 9.9%. So maybe just a couple little sips, but it is a Goose Island. It's called Tropical Beer Hug. And it's this cute little um, dog with nice hot pink sunglasses. So I'm excited to try it out.
Amazing. What about you, Brandon?
Oh, I'm pinkies up on my little beef milk cortado out here. It's still the work day for me on the West Coast, so getting after it.
All right. So let's get into the headlines. The first one that we had is AI oversight, right? It aligns so well with HR that leaders are saying that we should create a new function, the CHAIRO. So I don't know, the Charo, um, because AI is really reshaping the workforce and someone needs to oversee AI at work. So they're saying that the article they were discussing that this role would fall better under HR because they're responsible for guiding the company through AI adoption while addressing like human and AI collaboration and performance and training considerations. Some companies already have a CAIO, which is a chief AI officer, really like spearheading AI transformation. But they're seeing the need for HR to like think of AI as a type of workforce or like a type of employee. So we saw a few months ago, maybe Lattice take a lot of heat for their onboarding of AI workers, their the way they integrate it into their software. But I mean, I think this was very interesting. I see it from both sides. Like, yes, definitely if AI is going to become an employee, then I see how it would fall under HR to like manage this. Not just because they're not human or whatever, but like governance, like just making sure that there's no bias, seeing what the laws are in certain places. The article even mentioned maybe we need sexual harassment training for AI. And that just made me think like, oh my gosh, there's so many things to consider. So I do see how HR should have a say in this. I don't know about if we need our CHROs to be like CHRAIO. What do you guys think? Jocelyn?
Yeah, so this is very interesting. I totally understand the concept of wanting to place AI within the human resources function simply because, it is a tool that's helping employees be more productive, and it is in some cases taking the place of employees, and so there's work that's being produced by this tool um, that could fall under the HR purview. My concern is that I don't think most HR leaders are prepared to take on AI as part of their domain. They don't have the technical skill set, they don't have the experience, they don't have the education. And so I would really question whether or not this can be a universal switch in function between the CHRO and now the CHIARO, whatever it is. So I'd be concerned about that. But then at the same time, if it's somebody who's just technical, like a CISO, for example, or a chief AI officer, they're missing out on the human elements that come with the experience of being a CHRO. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. Brandon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually get excited about this because to me it signals that, hey, this could be the ushering in of a new empathy driven IT persona. I love this idea of somebody coming from an IT track, a CISO, like you mentioned, Jocelyn, that is leading with a little bit more of that qualitative skill set and competencies that we talk a lot about in HR. So I think it'd be a cool opportunity for like some new burgeoning up and comers. That kind of smash that typical idea or stereotype, if you will, that sometimes people have about IT folks. And we
Yeah.
saw this before from a case study perspective with a similar technology. I'll give a few people a minute to reflect back on what we did during the pandemic and see if they can put their finger on it. If you were to guess and say that we saw this with internal communications with the dawn of Slack and Microsoft Teams, you would be correct. We saw more internal comms folks get a dotted line to the CHRO through asynchronous communication tools. The whole goal of an internal comms person is to inform, inspire, and engage the workforce. And they had to do so more with the lens of the people operations initiative. So I think we can learn from what we did during the pandemic and potentially see around a corner here.
It's interesting that you bring up the internal comms because that's a whole other debate. Because the internal comms people are like, "Oh, we shouldn't report to HR." I wonder if this is how this will end. But I do see, like, again, not gonna lie, as I was looking at this, reading this article, I'm like, I see both things, and I kept like changing my mind because, yeah, like you said, Jocelyn, are we really prepared? Is that really the skill set of a CHRO out there? But then remember last week during the situation, you were talking about how it impacts employee engagement because there was an employee that was worried about what's going to happen with my job because of AI. And definitely for sure, HR folks are more prepared to handle that type of conversation that we have to have. So it's like I still go back and forth on this. I'm interested to see where this ends.
Well, I think there's a really big difference between transformation, which often sits in human resources, and then like day to day technology maintenance, right? So, absolutely, when it comes to like the internal communications of how AI is being adopted or the inclusion of employees to provide insight into how AI should be adopted into the organization, that's all transformational, right? That should sit under HR anyway. But this is totally new. Now, it doesn't mean that it couldn't happen in the future. Like the next generation of HR professionals could get the technical experience they need. I just don't think it's something that's going to happen overnight. And AI is moving so quickly, it doesn't need to.
True, exactly, because we don't even know where it's gonna end, how we're gonna be using it. So yeah, let's move on to the next article. And then this one, again, we've all heard the RTO discussion. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone has a different stance, but this one's a little bit different. So Cameo offered employees a $10,000 salary increase for them to return to the office 4 days a week, right? And they're a smaller company. They have roughly 24 employees eligible for this. So with the 10K raise comes free lunch, free parking, access to an on-site gym. And they are also encouraging out of state employees to move to Chicago. They'll give them relocation benefits. It's all painted like very optional right now. So that's why I was like, well, it's kind of optional, but is it really? Only time will tell. I did like that they had something that they're calling the team week, where like they'll fly out of state employees 1 week out of the month to Chicago to work with the team in person, and then the company pays for everything. So it's like essentially the same thing as a 10K raise. And I know from personal experience, at least when I've worked remotely for many years, and there was a job where I did get to go at least once a month, once every 2 months to like have that FaceTime with my team. That was very like positive. It was great. But I don't know. The other thing that they're taking like Friday. So they're saying come into the office for 4 days a week, right? And then Friday is a flex day where you can go to doctor's appointments and things like that. And I personally, and we've talked about this before on the show, don't like that whole positioning of remote being this like flex day type of thing. Like, oh, you don't have to work, you can go to the doctor, because that gets us into like that territory that people are thinking, oh, remote workers aren't doing anything. So I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
Well, there are a couple of things. First, Team Week. I just want to talk about that for a second. So, at my company, we actually twice a year will get the team together in a different part of the country, and we'll do strategy sessions and team building events and stuff like that. And that's a really great way of building culture. I do think once a month is too much because people have families. And so I would just flag that to anybody who's considering doing something like that. It's actually not a bonus for many people to have to do that travel. But back to this return to the office campaign that they've put together. Obviously, if they have 24 workers, it means that they're putting in, a quarter million plus as an investment into getting people back into the office. This is something that's really important to them, likely for their culture, for communications, for productivity, for camaraderie, etc. And that's their prerogative. That's what that's what they are trying to do. Um, if someone were to pay me $10,000 a year more to come into the office, I wouldn't take it personally. I really like the flexibility that I have working from home, and it's to the point where I don't think I'd ever take a job that required me to be in an office. So it's really going to come down to the tolerance level of the employees. Do they see this as a benefit and they're willing to go into the office, or is this something that they're going to back away from and maybe leave and go find another job?
Yeah, same. What do you think, Brandon?
I'm actually, as a remote worker before the pandemic, I'm a lifelong extrovert. I'm a little bit older than I look. I think there is natural benefit for younger generations to be in the office. Straight up, there are just like professional, social cues that you pick up by being tucked into a meeting. There's data out there that says promotions are going to folks that are showing up. And I'm actually hearing from some Gen Z folks that they are eager to get into the office or get back into cities and just have a more robust lifestyle. That is the like subjective. Objectively, let's break this down. $10,000 to get back into an office. Say in the average city, it's $25 a day to park. That's 6,500 bucks. Throw in a cup of coffee and a burrito twice a week, 5 days a week. There's 9,800 bucks right there. So it's really just remarketing what $10,000 means. One example, one of my buddies and mentors is he's a former CEO at the Chamber of Commerce in Bentonville, Arkansas. And Bentonville, Arkansas is Walmart's city headquarters they built. And back in 2019, he launched an initiative with the city where they would pay $10,000 tax incentive and give you a bike to relocate to Bentonville, Arkansas. The median home price back then was $270,000. Now, 5 years later, the median home price is $500,000. So these incentive programs are actual economic stimuli that are leveraged. But again, it's just how we repackage. What does $10,000 mean?
Yeah, and I mean, you brought up a good point because you mentioned that we are seeing that promotions are going to people that are in the office, and I think that's not a good thing because if you have a remote workforce or like distribute like mixed, everyone should be like promotion shouldn't be based on who's there in the FaceTime. And I think doing things like that, like forcing people or like incentivizing them to go back to the office really creates that type of culture because then I have been the remote worker where everyone's at the office and you're not there. And there's that clear like difference. It's just, it flows differently. So personally, like Jocelyn said, I wouldn't go back to an office for $10,000. Maybe if we add a few more zeros to that, I would consider it, but definitely not
Yes.
for 10,000. I think ultimately we have to accept that everyone isn't willing to go back to how we've always done things at work, and that's really okay. I'm interested to see how this evolves and if it goes from being optional to forced. That was really going to tell us what the real reasoning behind this for this specific company was. So, all right, seems like we need to talk about a situation. Let's move on to the situation room. Hey, Jocelyn, what do you have for us?
Hey, okay. So this is an employee who is in a really toxic work environment. I can't even remember all the details behind it, but it sounded awful. And he decided to go apply for another job, got another job. They actually offered him more money. He went to his boss, told his boss that he was leaving for more money. And then the boss told people, kind of slipped up and said, oh, yeah, and so is leaving because he's taking more money, which was just ridiculous that this manager said that, but they did. And so then everybody kind of, it was really unfortunate because of this idea of exit envy. People were really jealous that this individual was leaving and he was leaving for more money on top of it. So there were people saying, you don't deserve to be making that much. I deserve to be making that much. Where did you apply? I want to apply for that job. There's somebody who actually tried to compete with him for the job. And he had a really terrible experience before leaving. So, the idea of exit envy is an interesting concept, and I think that there are things to think about for those who are staying in the organization and then those that are leaving the organization. And so if we were to talk first about those leaving the organization, I'll kind of start with my own experience. So I worked at a company that had a really toxic work culture. I was really, really unhappy, and I decided that I was going to quit and leave. I didn't trust my manager at all, and so when I quit, I would not tell her where I was going. She kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and I wouldn't say where I was going. I just said, "Hey, this just isn't the right culture fit for me. I'm going to be leaving." And I'm so happy, especially after reading a story like this, that I never told her where I went. Obviously, she found out later because she could have seen on LinkedIn where I'd gone. But it didn't cause me any grief during that 2 week notice period, which is what this individual experienced. So I'm sure people have all different types of experiences when it comes to exit envy and the relationships that they have with their coworkers and their managers and how culture plays a part in it. But first, for those leaving, I would just say, stay humble. Don't kind of oversell your exit as a winning move, if that makes sense. And really acknowledge your colleagues' emotions, especially if they feel stuck. So rather than, bashing the organization that you're at, instead, acknowledging, I'm really sorry you feel this way. What could you do to make yourself feel better, or what can you do to better improve your situation? You can offer mentorship or guidance, or just continue networking if that's appropriate. But remaining humble is really, really key. And then for those staying, If you have a colleague that's leaving and you're maybe jealous that they're leaving, reframe it, right? See it as proof that good opportunities exist and self reflect. Um, does this trigger your own career dissatisfaction, for example? Another thing is actionable steps. So learn from the departing colleague, build connections, focus on your own growth. And that definitely allows for an opportunity on both sides, both the person leaving and anybody who's staying behind as well, to focus more on career development and recognize that success isn't always linear. Some dream jobs don't always work out, and that everyone has a different path, and timing and circumstances really matter.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up really good points, and I debated over sharing this or not as you were talking, but, like, I wanna talk also about from the leader's perspective because in this case, the manager had a lot to do with, like, starting all of that envy and stuff. I remember one of my first well, I don't know, early on in my leadership career, I had someone leave and come and tell me in a not that humble way, like, oh, I'm leaving and I'm going to so and so place, and this is how much I'm going to make. And I remember like taking my manager hat off and telling the person, like, you might want to not talk about this in this way. One, they were leaving to one of our clients, and I knew that that could if the wrong people in the company heard about that, that could like cause them to not even get to that other job. But I also just wanted to like explain to them like you don't want to create this envy in other people. But now I'm thinking like as a manager, what advice would you give to managers dealing with this type of situation? Because the manager themselves might have been envious.
Yes, that's true. And in this case, this manager probably was, since he or she decided to slip the salary comment. It's hard. If you're in a really toxic work culture, it might be really difficult for you to constantly overcome the situation day after day after day. So if you do have an employee who's come to you and they've said that they're leaving and they're leaving because, maybe it's not a great fit for them or they're making more money, obviously you would never give anybody else besides HR the reason why that individual is leaving the organization. That's their own private information. So that's number one is confidentiality and professionalism. But then, if you kind of think back to maybe a couple of the points that I mentioned earlier, particularly around career development, being able to frame it in a way with individuals who might come to me as a manager to say, hey, Tommy Joe's leaving and, I want to be able to make more money or I want to be able to get a job like that or something like that. For me as a manager, I've always said, like, I don't expect you to work for me forever. I want to help you develop to be the very best that you can be so that you're ready for the next step, whether that's with me or it's not. So, as a manager, I think you can take it as an opportunity to work with them on their own professional development. It keeps them engaged, it retains them, it better improves the culture, and it helps them prepare for the next step again, whether it's with you or it's not.
That's a really, really good way of framing it. I really like that because I think that will keep the environment positive. Well, maybe start to make it positive because if it was toxic to begin with. But it's a good way of handling it and then you don't deal with that because I can only imagine how that environment was after this person left. For the people left behind. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing this today. This was a very, very interesting situation. Let's see who's calling. Hello, James.
Is this the interview? Should be Matt Alder? That's what I was told. I changed my name specifically so I could really get it, but now I'm told I'm not. I'm not even in consideration. What the heck?
I love that. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So, for those people who don't know you, can you give like a short intro and tell us what you do?
What do I do? That is a great question. I'm an employer brander. I've been doing it for 11 years, for lack of a better word. It's really what I do. It's everything I focus on, and my goal, my remit in what I'm doing is to try and help businesses understand that employer brand is not some big, expensive monstrosity. It's an expensive deck that collects dust in a corner somewhere. It's not a nice to have. It's not fuzzy bunny. It's not just a bunch of words that you stick on a poster. That in fact, it's incredibly strategic in how you understand how people see and value what you offer people. And I have all sorts of bugbears we could talk about. We're going to take this wherever we want. We did exactly no planning, as you said, which I love. But I'll talk about employer branding about anything, but really it's about that everybody should be understanding what their employer brand is, why it matters, that anybody can do it and access it and leverage it. That's where I start.
Yeah. So I'm so excited that you're here today. And I was actually listening to the latest episode of your People MBA podcast where you were talking about video strategy. And I love video. So I thought we'd talk a little about that. And who knows, maybe by the end of this, we'll rebrand the entire show,
We'll
or
see.
maybe we'll just talk about video. So one of the things that you and Brian mentioned on the show was not just doing videos. Like, yeah, everyone understands video works. Everyone who's doing branding understands how it helps you connect and all of this stuff. Still, most recruiting videos are pretty boring, and that's
Yeah.
a nice way of saying it.
Yeah.
So why is your recommendation to think about a video strategy and not just about incorporating video?
Well, when you think about a video and you're like, oh, my video isn't very good, what do? You get a better camera, you get some more lights, you get a fancy pole that looks like I'm in some sort of spaceship. I know Brandon's got one. You throw stuff at it and you're just trying to make it look good. And then, maybe you get to the end of that, rabbit hole and you go, I don't know, maybe we should add some action. Let's have people skateboarding. And then you get crazy and you put your camera on the skateboard and you make your own dolly shot as you pan across the office of people doing this. Which is just like a Michael Bayian level kind of action shot, if ever there was one. And you realize there's not much to say or show, right? For most jobs, not all of them, I'm painting with a broad brush here, most jobs are boring looking. And so if the goal of video is to show something, you have to answer the question of, what should I be showing? And that is where, again, I go back to employer brand, because, to a man with a hammer, every problem is an employer brand situation. It's true. I am Matt Alder. I just got a haircut. It's an employer brand question, because the question isn't how do you make a better video that looks good. The question is, how do you use a video to help a candidate understand what they're about to get into? Employer brand is all about setting and meeting expectations of what's this job look like. And there's all sorts of kind of frameworks you apply. I tend to lean towards the idea that candidates only care about really three things. They care about what's the mission of the company, what's the experience of working there, what do I get when I get there? And you can unpack that 7,000 different ways, but ultimately that's all candidates really care about. Is this a mission worth saluting, or is it just, hey, we're just putting, we're selling things, insurance, I don't know, whatever. Or what's the day-to-day? Like, is it work from home? Is it collaborative? Is it autonomous? Is it friendly? Is it collaborative? Is it, confrontational? What's my boss like? What's the, the office like? What's the space like? All those things answer the question of what's the experience? And then ultimately, what do you get when you win? Is it the salary, the bonus, the professional development, the level of status you achieve? So what are we doing? How do we do it? What do we get when we do it? Is all candidates really want. And when you understand his employer brand is kind of answering those questions, you understand, oh, suddenly I know what's interesting to talk about on my video. Like every company has a day in the life video, and they all say the same things. It's never the same day every day. Duh, we know. Welcome to the 21st century. Hello, welcome. It's been a delight. So far, we're killing it. But beyond that, like everybody's the same. How many times does a video have to say things like, we work really fast here. Things move really, really fast. A year here is like 7 years someplace else. Like, if I had $1 for every video I saw that said that, I'd be like, what? Who are you comparing yourself to? The post office? We're all getting crazy fast. Like you're not differentiating yourself. You're not saying anything interesting about yourself. But if you understand that what makes you different is your mission, okay, now you suddenly have a focal point. If you understand what makes you different is your experience, okay, now you know what to talk about. That's where strategy tells you what to talk about, how to talk about it, and how to stand out so that information is actually useful.
So, all right, I'm sold on this, but I want to tell the mission. I want to tell the things that matter, but how do I choose the specific stories that matter?
Yeah. So there's, like I said, there's lots of frameworks to play with. Let's pretend for a minute that you're like, okay, I've looked at my mission and we sell insurance. So scratching that off, no so much. no one's going, woohoo, insurance. I love that. they're going to look at what's the day to day. And maybe yours is an organization where everybody's incredibly collaborative. They work hard together. They're really interested in being cross-functional teams, that they learn from each other, right? Because that's the kind of the fun part of standing next to someone who's really good at what they do, despite the fact that that's not what you do. And you kind of stand together and you kind of, oh, we're teaching each other what's going on. And you're really starting to cross-pollinate information. Okay, let's talk about that. Tell the story of last time you cross-pollinated information, where you were standing next to someone who knew so much about something you know so little about, which, by the way, is an emotional moment. You have that fear-based response where you're like, oh gosh, I'm standing next to someone who knows a lot about their thing that I know nothing about. That is a total kind of like insecure moment, right? And that's where a lot of people get really defensive, like, well, I know a lot about my stuff, and you get lots of friction. Well, that's not what your culture is about. Your culture is all about, you open that up, you embrace that, you say, I'm so thrilled that you know something about stuff that I don't know. Teach me so I can teach you how that might work in my world. Tell that story. Just ask around. When's the last time you saw that story? When's the last time you felt that story? And what's really interesting is that if you're talking about something that's true, you don't have to manufacture these stories. You just have to go uncover and pick up the rocks and find all the stories. Right? I tend to ask questions when I'm doing remote interviews, for videos. I ask questions like, what's surprising about this company? What surprised you specifically when you got here? That uncovers a whole bunch of stuff that you should be talking about, because it clearly stuck in their mind what was surprising, and it's clearly something that wasn't communicated to them very well at the beginning. So you're killing two birds with one stone here by saying something interesting, saying something true, but also something that candidates really wanted to hear anyway. So there's all sorts of kind of tricks to unpacking and finding that information, but it starts by saying, look, we're not here to paint over the Mona Lisa here. We're not trying to say, let's make a clean sheet of paper and produce something perfect. It's about understanding who you are, what you're all about, what you actually offer people. That's really what an EVP is all about. What's the employer value proposition? What are you offering people? And if you understand what that is, dive deep, right? There's a whole, if you go into business dev or you look at, kind of agency work, they say the more you niche up, the more deep you can go. And the same is true for your own employer brand. If you can realize, I don't have to talk about X and Y and Z because it's not really what our core brand is all about, right? I don't have to talk about innovation because while we care about innovation, it's not what differentiates us. Instead, I'm going to talk about, how much we support each other. Okay, what does that look like? Now, I'm working with a company, or I did work with a company who they talked about, they said, oh yeah, we really support each other. We really care about each other. And I'm like, oh, everybody says that. I'm like, oh, this is going to be trouble. And they say, yeah, last time I was sick, they sent food to my house. I was like,
that's a story.
Exactly. All you got to do is put your ears on and kind of let the thing that's weird, that strikes you, and go after that as hard as you can. That's kind of the secret to telling good stories, is to finding those good stories.
Is there anything that's off or that should be off limits for a recruiting or an employer branding video?
No. In fact, I would say, a lot of comms teams, I'm going to paint with another broad brush. I'm a whole painter back here. I got a whole tool chest over here. Comms teams might say, look, don't say anything negative. And I'm not a big believer in that, because the truth is everything that's amazing about you, like the stunning things that are about you, has an amazing part and a not so amazing part, right? Facebook forever was move fast and break things. And for a certain audience, that was great. But you couldn't say, yeah, we're move fast and break things, but we work at a nice slow pace. We're at a very relaxed pace. It's not very chaotic. You can't say that. How can you say we're going north and south at the same time? You pick a direction, that's who you are. So to me, this idea of never say anything bad is wrong. It's misguided. It's flattening the picture you're trying to kind of portray. If you say we're all about support, for example, and you tell all these amazing stories about how you support each other, you should also kind of give a little indication that, hey, being supportive means we aren't quite as fast-paced as some places might be. Or it can be a little frustrating when you have a good idea, but you realize you have to get a lot of consensus in to get that done, to get everybody on board to make it happen. That's just the culture. That's just how that organization works. So every strength is its own weakness. And in fact, what's really interesting is that if you talk about the weakness, you're actually proving the strength. Every company wants to say, we care about our people. Like every company says. Let me rephrase. Every company not named Goldman Sachs wants to say how much they care about their people. And I love to make fun of Goldman Sachs because they ain't scared of me at all. And nor should they be. But, if you're going to say it, what does that mean? What is the other side of it? And if you can't tell me that the downside of caring about your people is, I don't believe you. You sound like yet another. You sound like just, hey, I opened a book of nice things to say about companies and I randomly picked one like Scrabble tiles and hey, we care about each other. If you tell me we care about each other, and sometimes that makes for some complicated relationships at work because suddenly what happens when you start to care about each other? Well, you become friends outside the office and you have relationships and sometimes you have relationships outside the office and that gets complicated. And if you kind of go, la, 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 I don't know, it sounds like you're just saying we care about each other and we support each other because it's a nice thing to say. But if you say, look, it's a funny story. It was really interesting when the CFO and the head of product management started dating. That's a story. That's a story that says, okay, that's how much we collaborate because we're cross-pollinating, we're talking to each other, we're engaging. These are people who would never be in the same room together outside of an all hands, right? And suddenly you're saying, wait, they interacted so much and they worked together side by side and you talk about the pros and cons and hey, it was a bumpy road and for a while it was kind of rough and it was complicated and
would you have the employees tell that story or would someone else tell that particular story you're talking about?
You'd want to tell that story in a very anonymized way. You wouldn't say my CFO and the blah, blah, blah. You'd really kind of blank that stuff out. But you can talk about the idea of, look, this is a place where relationships happen, and we mean relationships in every conceivable way. We mean best friends happen here, romantic relationships happen here. And when you understand that and you don't see that as a problem, but it's simply an outcome of working together really, really well, you learn to kind of work with it. And that sounds like a terrifying thing to talk about. Like every comms person who heard me was like, fire everybody, it's all over. Just, eject, eject, eject. But if you tell the story in such a way that says this negative thing that sounds horrible or sounds really, really complicated, unpleasant, it's actually proof of what we try to claim to people, suddenly people believe this positive thing way more. And that's really what it's about. Because I think ultimately, and this is a thing that recruiters love to hate me for saying, even though I love them, is that recruiters have a credibility problem. They say all sorts of wonderful things. They don't bring proof. They don't bring case studies. They don't bring examples. They don't bring stories. And they just say, if I said it once, it must be true, because they have that burden of knowledge. They know it's true because they see it every day. But when you go out in the real world and say, hey, we're a really innovative place, that's the beginning of a story, not the full story. And the problem is most recruiters kind of call that, as I said, it's innovative, so we're good to go, right? Like, no, you have to prove it like over and over again. So brands like this, they're fully formed, that understands their positives and negatives, that gives recruiters credible stories to talk about so that they can go out in the world and stand out head and shoulders over every other recruiter who's just saying, we're great, we're great, we're great, we're great.
So another thing that you guys mentioned in the episode was about this idea of having like an ongoing series of videos, right? Not just like one and done, like, oh, here's a story, or the typical series of like, we're showcasing the story of all of our employees. Like, who is doing this well? Do you have any examples of anyone doing really good like series of videos?
I don't have that. Here is my open, telling you, show me all my cards. There are 20 million businesses in North America, and there's millions more around the world. I don't know. There's too many. There's too many for me to know. So when anybody asks me, name a company who does X well, it's impossible for me to know because what I know is like a 0.000000001% of the overall. So if I say this is good, all I'm doing is inviting a million people to say, well, this is better. And you're probably right because I don't have the bandwidth to kind of look at everything. I will say that a good strategy says, look, there is a time and place for those big tentpole videos. They're glossy. The CEO talks about how much they care about their company and blah, 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 blah. And it's got lots of panning and lots of, clearly shot by a high-def camera and all that good stuff. But that isn't the full story because that's just what the CEO says. And let's be fair, what the CEO knows about the company versus what's really going on in a company is usually night and flippin' day. Exactly. So hearing from them is nice if they want to talk about the vision of the company, the future of the company, what their intentions were, all the CEO type stuff. I'm not going to ask the CEO 99 times out of 100 what the culture is because the CEO don't know. They live in an ivory tower that they don't know. If you want to augment that with, hey, our culture is X, Y, and Z, bring me people who live it every day. And so what you realize is that a strategy says, there is no right answer. What you can do is say, what are the opportunities I have in front of me? CEO wants to talk to me. CEO doesn't want to talk to me. Great. That's an opportunity or that's not an opportunity. I have staff who like the working here. Let's talk to them. Do they work from home? Do they work remotely? Do they work here? Those are opportunities. They're all opportunities. And what you're trying to do is say, if we understand what our brand is all about, we're about X. What are all the different ways we can tell those stories? Now, in some cases, that tentpole video, one a year, and then you augment it with even just simple handheld, here, let me tell you a 30-second blah, blah, blah about why I like working here, TikTok style, and there's so many great companies who are doing those videos and they embed them into the career site and the job postings, and that's all good. That counts as video too.
Yeah.
You have to make sure they're all lining up to tell aligned stories. Because if the CEO talks about how incredibly innovative the company is, but all the people are talking about how much they feel supported, I'm not sure they're working at the same company. And suddenly you're working at cross purposes. So if you're thinking about, and you should be, video as a campaign or video as a channel strategy, which is not a let's do one and call it a day till next year, but how do I regularly build videos? You should be thinking about the machinery that allows you to create content. So instead of saying, hey, let's make a video, and when you say let's make a video, what you are putting yourself to task to do is trying to tell everybody's story at once, and that's literally impossible. If you've got more than 2 people at the company, it's impossible. And and then you have to play that game of let's bring in a black person, let's bring in a woman, and you tokenize the hell out of it. That was really useless. But if instead you say, look, today I want to talk about Bob's story. And Bob happens to be whatever Bob happens to be and whatever team he happens to work at. And we want to tell his story, knowing that next week we're going to tell Patel's story, and his story is completely different, but at the same time talk about the same ideas because he's in a different department, at a different level, in a different office, all that other stuff. The value is not in the video. The value is in how all those videos align to tell a similar story, because suddenly you go, they don't just say this to say it. They live that every day because they found all these different people in all these different places who are talking about their version of what that's like. And my favorite trick is always to say, think of your brand and think of the team for whom that is generally less likely. So if you want to tell everybody you're incredibly supportive, talk to your legal team. Legal team and supportive, not often in the same sentence. But if your legal team is talking about how they feel supported, the legal team, oh, wow, they must mean it. And that is the game. It's a game of credibility. Video's purpose is to show you, not to tell you. And so you got to pick what you want to show, and then showing is proving. That's how you build a strategy. And then you can take that 7 different ways, chop it up and turn it to TikToks, chop it up and turn it to Instagrams, and do this and do that. There's lots of stuff. But if you're trying to think about, I need a video, you're asking for pain and nothing to show for it in the end of it, other than the CEO tapping you on the head going, hey, good job. And you're like, nobody wants this.
And the CFO saying, we're not spending money on this.
Exactly. You made a friend and then you made an enemy. And I don't think that was a great trade-off. But if you tell a lot of stories, you can say, one, you start to get good at it, which means you get cost-effective story building. Each individual story becomes easier to tell, faster to tell, cheaper to tell. It feels like it's not hey, let's tell 4 stories and then we're done. You're always telling stories. So you just hired someone with a really weird story. They happen to be an Olympic athlete. Go get their story. Hey, next week, you know who we haven't talked about in a long time? Sally. Let's go talk to Sally. And you can start to go, how do I keep telling more and more? That way nobody feels left out, because it's not that you haven't told their story. It's that you haven't gotten to them yet. And suddenly people feel involved. And that way because look, very few employers are going to say, let me show you the video about how great my company is. Not so much. But everybody on your team is going to share the video about you if you talk about why you work there, why you love your team, and what's going on. Suddenly, you get more of a shared value viral consensus, and people start to push it out to more and more people. So video is not just a thing you do. It's a way of looking at your challenge, way you're looking at your problems, and how you want to tell those stories.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this. This was really, really good. Let's move on to trending or ending. Hey, Brandon.
What's up, Rhona?
All right, let's get into it. What do you have for us today?
Let's get into it. Trending or ending. So I was on the internet last week and our boy Tim Sackett dropped this heater. He said, if you use time to fill as a TA metric of success, you should be fired. Woof. That is quite a spicy take from Tim. Before we get into it, let's break it down. What is time to fill? Time to fill is the time to fill a job vacancy from the rec launch to offer acceptance. Sometimes it gets bucketed in with time to hire, which is a separate metric. Time to hire is the time it takes a candidate to apply and accept an offer. So I thought this one was a fun one for sure. But let's break it down. Operationally, time is fundamental to our service level agreements to the organizations we serve. And recruiters have three things to work with when we hire. They are time, quality, and cost. Those are the three variables we get to work with. Hiring managers can pick two. Operationally, all recruiters work in headcount planning. What that means is we have a spreadsheet broken down into quarters for the positions we are hiring for. And quarters is just a fancy word for time. So I think this is an interesting one because it's trending, but I don't think it's ending. And I've seen a little bit of this shirking from time-based metrics in recruiting to drive a wedge from a marketing perspective for quality of hire. And a lot of times we see this talk track coming from folks that are trying to sell a product or service. So I actually have four obvious reasons time to fill is an important metric, particularly for venture capital backed startups. But before I jump in, what do you got?
I mean, time to fill to me is a diagnostic metric. Like I definitely don't agree that we shouldn't be tracking it. We definitely shouldn't use it to measure productivity. So for me, time to fill isn't even something that I talk to my team at a tactical level. It's something that I use to really time to fill is how I get headcount for my recruiting team. Time to fill is how I tie things back to the business. So I think that's where this whole debate starts. And it's like, no, let's do quality of hire. And I'm thinking, why are people at a tactical level even concerned with this metric? This is not how you measure productivity. That's just my thoughts on it.
Totally. I think from a high level strategy perspective, we have to include time, but it's not necessarily something that every single recruiter needs to be operating in a place of fear. I think there is this level of confidence and conviction that comes from recruiting experience. Here are the four reasons why time to fill is an important metric for venture capital backed startups. One, building a product to deliver a return to investors is the whole point of VC startups. So every unfilled role delays execution, product development, revenue growth, and slowing the path to profitability for investors. So that's the first. The second reason is it's keeping up with market momentum. Startups move super fast. James talked about speed earlier, but in the VC world, slow hiring means losing ground to competitors, missing critical windows for product launches and scaling efforts, and just time to market, especially if you're trying to establish product market fit. Third reason why time to fill is important for early stage startups is it prevents burnout and attrition. Actually, open roles means that existing employees often take on extra work. They have increased burnout risk and potential turnover, which creates a bigger hiring problem when you have a smaller team. And then the fourth is focusing on time from an early stage hiring perspective helps maximize runway efficiency. Startups burn cash whether roles are filled or not. So every day without the right people is wasted opportunity and lost productivity. But don't take my word for it, Rhona. Let's just look at the data. What does the data say? Carta put out a report recently that was talking about the bridge from seed to Series A conversion points. And that was about 50% from 2017 to 2020. And then trending downward since 2021, it's actually been 35% of companies down to 24% of companies down to 17% of early stage venture backed startups get from seed to Series A. So don't tell me time doesn't have an impact there.
Yeah, to me, every time I hear this debate, and we hear it every couple of months, someone gets on the internet and says, "Time to fill is dead. Don't do it. Don't look at it." It's not realistic because time to fill is really like everything you explained, how you go back and how you tie things back to the business. Because at the end of the day, the business does care about time, and they care about money, and time is money. I think time to fill is here to stay. It's never going to end. I think what we need to change is how we talk about time to fill and who we talk to it about. But we should 100,000,000% be measuring it.
Yes, 100%. And I think people say it on social media because it's like a little bit of jazz hands. It's an entry point to talk about higher level things like quality of hire and to have a marketing revamp. One alternative that I like to just solely looking at time to fill is hiring velocity. What is the percentage of positions over the course of a year that were hired on time? In that headcount plan, there should be a column for the days that are estimated to fill that position for every single role. And that could be 30 days, 45, 60, 90. And then let's talk about like an 80+% hiring velocity number with our executives and say, hey, we're actually really good with hiring at urgency. And let's tie that into the post-hire outcomes. So yeah, we filled this ahead of headcount plan. What was that post-hire outcome? What were some of the dynamics at play?
Exactly. Amazing. Well,
Well, before we hang up, should we call Tim? See what Tim has to say?
I don't know. Do you want to call him?
Let's give him a call. Let's see if he picks up.
How you reach Tim Sackett? Leave your name and number, and I'll call you back.
Hey, what's up, Tim? It's Brandon Jeffs, and
Rhona Pierce.
you are on the Alder Hour with Purple Acorn. We just wanted to check in and talk a little bit about time to fill with you. Hope you're having a lovely Monday. We'll see you out in Vegas, buddy.
Bye.
All right, so Tim didn't answer. He's probably working those recs, but we'll have to ask him in person. Any other thoughts on time to fill?
I think it's here to stay. It's never going away. I think we need to talk about it differently, and there's room for other metrics. It's not a either or thing. We just need to embrace it and learn how to use it to our advantage.
Couldn't agree more.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this, Brandon. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Rhona. This is a trip.
All right. Bye. All right. So this was a great show. I think I saw Matt was on. We did not burn the house down. We have a ton of great shows in the lineup. We have the HR Morning Show on Tuesdays, From the Desk, My First Job, and many more. To see more of our shows, you can go to our LinkedIn page and follow us. And if you want more Purple Acorn, head over to purpleacornnetwork.com. You can find us as a podcast on Spotify, and Matt will for sure be back next week. This is Rhona Pierce clocking out.